Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome yet again to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. I am Scot McKay. I'm your host, and you can find me at Scot McKay on just about every platform out there, including now YouTube. My handle is at Scot McKay, SCOT, MCKAY, 1T only. If you haven't joined our Facebook group yet, gentlemen, what are you waiting for? Just do it. Go to Facebook, sign up for the Mountaintop Summit. Lots of new things there for you. Also, at mountaintoppodcast.com, including my latest program, Unsettled, which is all about saying screw it to the suburban sleepwalk and going out there and living your best life because the women will follow. Great program. It was actually a group coaching program 2 years ago, and now is the right time to release it 100% downloadable for you so you can enjoy it immediately. Instant gratification for you there, ironically enough. That's called Unsettled, and you can get more information on that at mountaintoppodcast.com/unsettled or just by going to mountaintoppodcast.com. With me today is a new friend of mine. He and I talked at length before we hit record on this episode. He is going to have a lot of wonderful concepts to present to you surrounding masculinity and femininity, and he's coming from the perspective of not only being a best-selling author, but a psychologist. His name is Dr. Avram Weiss, and he is coming to us from the beautiful state of Maine. Avram, welcome, man.
Scott, I'm delighted to be here. We've already been talking a while and enjoying it.
Yeah, likewise, for sure, my man. You have written a book with a very illustrious title. Hidden in Plain Sight. How men's fears of women shape their intimate relationships. And indeed, for the good of the cause here, we are going to be focusing on the topic of how men fear women today. Yeah. I got to ask you, just to get started here, Avram, talk to me about that title. It's Hiding in Plain Sight, is it?
Yeah, it is. It was actually not my first choice for the title. We're going to jump right in the deep end here, because my first choice for the title was Pussy Whipped. Because I think it's fascinating that the worst insult that one man can say to another is that he's controlled by a woman.
Or you're a loser. Those two, I think, are on equal footing.
Yeah, but I mean, yes. But it's such a powerful insult to another man to say you're controlled, not by your boss, not by the world, but by a woman.
I love that title. It's one word that says it all.
Yeah.
Somebody wimped out at your publishing company. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So, still, being pussy whipped would be hidden in plain sight to most guys?
Well, I think what happens when I suggest to men, I like to intentionally use the word scared or afraid, because men are taught to not be afraid of anything. And so that word really gets their attention. And when I raise the possibility that they might be afraid of a woman, I get first an instant pushback. And then literally within a minute or two, you can see the idea kind of settling in, and they're like, that would really explain a lot. And then we start unpacking everything with that different lens.
Well, you know what's interesting about the way you're couching this whole conversation?
Yeah.
No pun intended, since you're a psychologist couch.
Oh, I get it.
The way you're positioning this conversation is extremely interesting to me, because most men will come to me in open acknowledgement that they're afraid of something having to do with women. They don't like it, but at least they've acknowledged it. Now, I will also acknowledge that the biggest problem most men have is they refuse to ask for directions about anything because they're too, wait for it, macho to do that.
Yes.
And the problem with having that fault affecting our psyche and therefore our lives writ large is we'll never get help for anything. We're stuck with all of our faults. If we don't ever ask for help on anything and we think we're all right, we're all, we Gucci, we got this all going on just fine. Yeah. Even when under the surface, it's a disaster.
But it's even worse of a problem than that, because it's what leads to men not living as long as women, because we don't ask for help when we're sick. We're just like, just rub a little dirt on it. It's fine. And so there's a lot of research about men, dying higher rates of death from cancer. because they don't go to the doctor. And it's all part of exactly what you're saying, being taught not to ask for help, to tough it out.
For sure. For sure. However, all of that said, getting back to what you just opined about, which I think is probably more factual than opinion-based, that most men really bristle at the idea of being told they're afraid of women, is we all really are afraid of something having to do with something feminine, female, a girl, a woman, something out there causes us to be afraid.
And it's largely unknown, but men get it pretty quickly, but women mostly still think I'm a little crazy. Even it takes quite a while because women see men as sort of dominant and in control, and that fear is so hidden that it really takes a while before they can see the truth in that.
That's been my experience also, Avram, is that women have a very hard time thinking men are afraid of much of anything, frankly, let alone women. I mean,
well, we've sold them a bill of goods.
Yeah, we have. We've covered it up pretty good, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the title, Hidden in Plain Sight. It's right there.
Ah, okay. Yeah, okay.
Right
so
there.
You and I are tracking.
But see, after you have this thought, like for your listeners now they're going to go home and they're going to see it everywhere, right? Because once you understand it, once you see it, then you see it everywhere.
Yeah, women are like, I'm just a girl. Why would a guy be afraid of little old me?
He's so much bigger than me. So much,
And the fantasy that most women have towards men they would be sexually attracted to certainly doesn't surround that guy being afraid of them.
No.
Or being submissive to them.
Fearless. Yes.
Right. Yeah, that's why the romance novels that women poke their noses into are usually so shocking to men if we ever crack one open and see what's in there.
I use that example to help people understand all the time and to help men understand who are dating. You know, they talk about feeling really confused and helpless and lost. And I'm like, well, you should be confused because you're getting completely contradictory messages.
Man, this show is already moving at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. I love it. Let's level
that's
set
because we
here.
warmed up for 30 minutes.
Yeah, right. All right, so let's level set here. Off the top of my head, I categorize the kinds of fears men have. Now, what I love about your area of expertise is it's not mine. You're thinking about a lot of the same things conceptually, but you're coming from a completely different place in considering them and finding solutions to make our lives better thereby.
Yep.
So off the top of my head, I have guys who come to me, and this list will be extremely familiar to this audience.
Yeah.
Fear of approaching women and meeting them. I mean, what do I say to her? How do I start a conversation? Fear of rejection goes along with that. What if I make myself vulnerable to a woman and she just stomps all over me? Then I've been beaten by a girl and my friends are going to laugh and it's really emasculating, dude. I don't want that to happen. The third one, fear of being accused, which has sprouted up probably in the last few decades, culminating, I would say, in the Me Too movement, where men are being told, or at least it's being implied to most men that, hey, look, you know what? If you express any kind of social interest at all, sometimes to a woman, let alone heterosexual interest in her, plan on being at the very least, I mean, at best, canceled, at worst, locked up, and we throw away the key. I mean, you're basically, Harvey Weinstein if you do that sort of thing. So guys are very afraid not only of being branded a bad actor by virtue of being interested in women, they're afraid of being thrown under the jail. A lot of guys also take the idea of enthusiastic consent to a whole different level because they're thinking, well, what if she tells me it's okay to have sex tonight, wakes up in the morning and goes, ha, I was only kidding, you're going to jail. I mean, guys have these horrific fears, sometimes deeply embedded now. You also have kind of projecting from that fear of the family law system. If I get into a relationship with this woman and God forbid marry her, she's going to leave me and take half of my wealth and come back for more and, child support. I mean, right now you have the whole Roe versus Wade idea of responsible childbirth, being ready for pregnancy. And it is indeed a woman's issue. But I have seen zero talk about a man's right to pay child support or not. Whether a man decides if he wants to be a father or not is irrelevant. That's all the woman's choice. And that scares the bejeebers out of men. Yet we still feel like we don't have freedom of speech to talk about that sort of thing, apart from, venues like this one. And then kind of the cherry on top of the sundae, if you mind a very rough sexual reference, is fear of sex. I mean, a lot of guys are like, man, what if I ejaculate prematurely? What if I can't get it up? What if I don't have the penis size of a porn star that I've, likened to the kind of videos I watch all day because I'm addicted to it? Then women aren't going to like me. They're going to point at my crotch and laugh. Man, it is a tangled web of fear surrounding pretty much all things female nowadays. And of course, we're still left with ye old idea of women. You can't understand them. You can't live with them. You can't live without them, et cetera, et cetera. And now women seem like they're coming after our masculinity, telling us our masculinity is toxic. Sit down and shut up. And yet boys and young men are given nothing to replace it with. There really is a lot, at least on the surface, ostensibly, to be afraid of, isn't there?
Well, I think there is. And I think you're accurately seeing all the things you described. I would, by the way, just a side comment to something you just said. In the absence of a clearly identified proactive masculinity, that's going to be men giving that to boys, not women, just to be clear about that. But let me respond to two of your examples, and I think to kind of deepen to the fears that underlie what we see on the surface. So you talked about the example of the guy being afraid to ask women out, being shot down and rejected, right?
Yeah.
Let's assume that that guy is a successful business person and would think nothing about applying to, let's say, 50 jobs and suffering 49 rejections to get the job he wanted. That same guy could be fearless in the work world of or let's say he's a salesman and he knows he's going to call on 100 customers before he doesn't think a thing of it, doesn't worry about that rejection at all. So what is it that makes the rejection by a woman so much more frightening to these brave, fearless guys in the work world?
Well, I have asked that very question on this show numerous times.
Yeah.
The example I love to give is when I was riding crotch rocket motorcycles with Marine Corps guys who were veterans of Desert Storm out in Yuma, Arizona. They were the biggest pusswads when it came to asking women out. It's the same question. So I don't want to give my answer again because I've given it ad nauseum.
All right, well, let me give you my answer.
First person, let us have it.
My answer is a little long. But when babies
it's probably worth it. Go for it.
All right. When we're babies, most babies are raised almost exclusively by women. Emotionally, their attachment. Dad may, come in and do some work, but in a lot of families still the primary emotional relationship with is a woman. And there's some interesting research that shows when moms pull back their attention from their children for just a minute, boy and girl babies fall apart. They literally can lose body control if their mom just sort of is not attending to them for a moment. So for boys who grow into men, they grow up watching their mothers very carefully and knowing that their well-being is completely dependent on engaging a woman. So we're helpless. Infants are helpless. They can't even walk. They can't talk. They can't make food for themselves. They're completely reliant on a woman for their emotional and physical well-being, and they learn how to watch her for any sign that her attention is wavering or she might be about to leave. And that's the explanation. So as babies, it's if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, which grows up into happy wife, happy life. But it's the same process.
See, I knew you were the right guy to get on this show to talk about this. Man, that is fascinating and right on the money. I want you to keep talking.
Well, if we had a video, if we were on video, I could show you a video of this early research and watching these children just fall apart. What's interesting then is you go into adult relationships, heterosexual relationships, and men and women both get physiologically distressed during conflict, but it doesn't bother women. They're okay with being upset, and so they tend to they lean in. But it bothers men to be physiologically distressed in conflict, so they do everything they can to distance and separate and withdraw. So this is what happens in heterosexual conflict, is the more the man withdraws, the more the woman pursues. The more the woman pursues, the more the man withdraws. And that's why the conflict keeps escalating, because they're having an entirely different reaction to what's happening.
Because after all, the man feels at his masculine core, hey, it's my job to provide, protect, stay cool, keep the calm here, and be the strong one, which is why anytime, well, for example, family trauma happens, the guy's the one who gets the least amount of support and ends up taking the brunt of all the health issues. Yeah. He's the one who gets fat and drunk, and I'm, projecting a little bit here. It's happened in this family. I know how this goes.
All those things are true, but what he doesn't get then is the closeness and tenderness and warmth and intimacy on the other side.
Right. Yeah.
And as you point out, the fun.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. All right. So let's backtrack just a little bit for the sake of the cause.
Sure.
One of the things that you just glibly threw out on the table and it went flowing right under the bridge was it will be men who give masculinity back to our sons.
Yes.
There are pundits out there who are saying, men, you don't have the luxury of passively bitching and complaining about what's going on with men nowadays. You must stand up and you must actively raise your sons.
I would be in that group.
Yes. Well, me too. If you aren't actively raising your son, don't come complaining to me when he turns out to be less than masculine, isn't attracting women, isn't succeeding at whatever it is he wanted to succeed with. Yes, it will be men who hand that to their sons. One of the things that goes along with being raised by a mom, especially in this culture nowadays, is a lot of time these young kids, boys and girls, I might add, are being raised only by mom.
Yes.
There is no man in the picture to pass down the masculinity to. And I would argue that's not only important for little boys, that's important for little girls too. They need to see that image of dad around the house. I know you're not going to disagree with this, but when there is no archetypal example, let alone an effective one, a morally sound, valid one, a non-toxic one, a virtuous one as opposed to a toxic example of masculinity around the house, there's a void there.
Yeah.
And that enables that fear to fester even more, doesn't it? That fear of women.
It does. And I'll tell you a sad version of this. I have recently begun asking women, what did you learn from your mom about men? And what I mean by that is not just the words your mom spoke to you, but what your mom taught to you by example about how she treated your father. And almost without exception, what women are telling me is I learned to not trust men, to not rely on men, to not think much of men, and to not turn to them for close companionship.
Now, I want to go along with that with one thing real quickly.
Yeah.
Boys who are being raised by moms are told to be Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They're learning from their moms about themselves as men, what their mom thinks about men. The reason that's important is that we're very critical of men these days for being almost paranoid about women. And often, I would say criticized is the word I hear most often from men in my office, talking about their relationships. They feel criticized. But when you understand that the criticism is there, then men don't look so paranoid because they are sensing the underlying distrust and disrespect that women are taught to have about men.
So the beautiful part of this story we're weaving right here, you and I together, is we can take responsibility and be part of the solution. We don't have to be victimized by this fear of women we've been handed.
So that's the story I wanted to tell you about. So about a little more than 10 years ago, I started doing therapy groups for just men. It was like an experiment. And I remember distinctly standing outside the door for the first group thinking, Avram, this is the worst idea you have ever had. This is going to be a disaster. They're going to talk sports. They're going to talk politics. They're going to talk work, but nobody will open up and get very personal. Well, I freely admit I was 180 degrees wrong. The groups I run for men are in many ways more open emotionally with each other. Well, let me put it this way. The men are much more emotionally open with each other in a men's only group than a men and women's mixed group. And so the picture we have of men as being emotionally shut down is the way men look in mixed company. Men are dying to talk to each other, dying to be close to other men, dying to be open. And part of what I talk about in the book is that we're only going to get there with men talking to men. Most men are not ready to talk to women. they need to talk with other men first to learn more about how to be open.
I think a lot of men see their journey as a solo flight.
Mm-hmm.
I got to figure this out. This is all on me.
That's not possible, unfortunately.
Well, of course it's not possible. We live in a social culture.
Well, also, we're relational creatures. We have an entire part of our brain called our mirror neurons, which just are there to resonate with what other people are doing.
Yeah, you and I are on the same page.
Yeah.
So when men stubbornly, selfishly, and I would say arrogantly, and all three of those traits aren't positive ones, cognitively,
yeah,
descend into this solo mission. I don't need anybody. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I got to handle this myself, either from a reactive mindset of it being a protection mechanism. I don't want to be hurt more than I am now, or because legitimately they're arrogant enough to believe they don't need any help here, which we've already covered. For whichever reason it is, the outcome's still the same. We're overpowered. We can't do this solo.
Yeah.
But like you just adeptly mentioned, we're certainly not going to reach out to a room full of chicks trying to get the help we need here.
Not as a starting place.
Right. So when guys are confronted with the idea of a men's group, a lot of times we push back. This is not going to be a good thing. I'm going to be made fun of. These macho guys are going to pick on me. Whatever fear we have going into it, it's usually assuaged as soon as they realize they're with a band of brothers who have the same fears when they walked into that room. And now we can relax with each other and kind of open up. And it's actually really kind of cool. This is why fraternity brothers, guys who fought in the war together, even guys who ride motorcycles together, like my aforementioned group of guys in Yuma, Arizona. I mean, that's why we become good friends, because ultimately we start talking about something other than sports and motorcycles or war or guns or whatever brought us together. And it is very, very powerful to realize you're not alone.
It is also a return to early in our lives. That there's a lot of research now on boys, early life boys. And one of the things we're finding, no surprise to those of us who lived through it, is that boys are just as interested in friendships with other boys, and those friendships are just as deep and intimate as the girls' friendships with other girls. But then somewhere in grade school, we kind of talk boys out of being friends with other boys. And it's a tremendous loss for them. It's a tremendous loss of deep, close friendships. And it is often not until adulthood that we find ways, as you're pointing out, to come back to what we experienced as little kids.
And, meanwhile, we here, ensconced in our comfortable culture in the West, tend to look upon tribes like the Maasai, who I love to talk about, these guys in the West, as being primitive or something like that. And yet, they're the ones who are smart enough to have never given this cultural element up.
Yeah.
Men in that tribe know how to be a band of brothers. They know how to support each other. Perhaps because their masculinity still carries that primal meaning. They're hunting and protecting in a way that, requires them to stay cohesively bound as a unit together, where somehow, with modernity and then post-modernity, we got lulled to kind of what I call the suburban sleepwalk into thinking, masculinity is more symbolic than anything, or at best, likened to what we talk about around here, serving to be the catalyst of masculine-feminine attraction. But a band of brothers actually protecting and providing together, teaming up with people who are in alliance with you, what does that even mean anymore to most guys?
Right. Let me add another piece to that. It's not just reduction of masculinity into a symbolic realm, but it's also removing of masculinity from the home.
You bet.
So both obviously in divorce, but less obviously, it's not that many generations ago that dads worked at home. And so kids grew up seeing their fathers working and what their father and their mother did to be productive. Now dads work outside the home, although some are back home, but work and productivity are a mystery to children. They don't have any idea what it looks like.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It is. And it's like, I mentioned to you as we were talking earlier, I live on an island that's a fishing community, and boys grow up here both seeing their dads work and going to work with their dad. And these kids don't want to move away from here. They grew up here in a very tight community with elder men teaching them, and they don't want to leave that.
Yeah, they have the example of their fathers right before their very eyes.
Yeah, and uncles and, all kinds of men look out for young men here.
Yeah, again, the title of your book, Hidden in Plain Sight.
Yeah.
Right? When the example of a masculine figure we look up to, in the context of what you're talking about, Avram, it's not only just dad, it's dad and all of his fishing buddies. It's
absolutely
a group of men. And
doesn't
that
have
is
to be biologically related.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you tell men who are perhaps raising their hand and going, yeah, you know what? This fear of women I have in my life may be a little bit deeper, or at least more multifaceted than I've ever given it credit for. Obviously, these guys can read your book, but what would you tell guys as kind of a starting point, a jumping off point to, I don't know if the word heal is the right word, or to progress or grow from this? Yeah,
I like grow. I'll make two specific suggestions. One is one thing a lot of couples are doing, which I did not think of, but they're reading the book together, like chapter by chapter, like they each read chapter 1 and then they make a time to talk about it. Then they each read chapter 2. And it's turning out to be very helpful in that way because two things happen. One, a lot of things that men have not been able to articulate to their partners, they can say, yeah, it's like that in chapter 3. That's me. And a lot of things that women have not understood about their husbands or partners, they can understand. And so going through the book together can be a really helpful thing to do. And then there is a chapter in the book for guys who would like to get together with other guys to learn about these things together. And it lays out in very sort of concrete ways. And there's a link to a Facebook page group where guys who are doing this can talk with each other about, do you meet on Sundays or Wednesdays? How did you find members? Whatever it is they want to talk about in terms of getting a group going. And it's an experience that sadly most men don't have in their lives, being a part of a group of men.
I think that's powerful. And in just a minute or two, I'm going to send these guys not only to your website, but also to my Amazon influencer storefront where they can get not only your book, Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships, but also they can get your award-winning book, Living and Loving Mutually, How to Break Free of Hurtful Relationship Patterns, which of course is related. But before we do that, I want to come back to this point of women having a blind spot with regard to men being afraid of them.
Yes.
Because I think that is so central to the solution here.
I agree.
Guys, we need to get it through our noggins. Women don't understand. They can't wrap their heads around the idea of us as men being scared of them. And this is first person plural. I'm raising my own hand. Okay. Yeah. On my deathbed someday, which I hope is a long time from now, I may still not have completely conquered it. It's just something so deeply embedded in manhood nowadays that it's almost tragic. But if you come back to that very baseline premise that the very women we are so afraid of, and, we've enumerated the different ways in which we fear women, when you get right down to it, they don't even understand this to be a functional truth in their life. That somehow turns it around on us as almost a self-created fear and therefore a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes. The women aren't asking for us to be afraid of them, gentlemen. They don't want that or need that from us unless they're broken. They want a man to step up and show up. So many of us, Avram, are out there wondering how in the world women can say, where's my John Wayne? Where's my real man? They have calendars of men in uniform, military guys and firemen. And we're scratching our heads going, didn't you all just say that was toxic and you wanted us to be more like women with penises? Well, the women we're sexually attracted to are not the ones demanding us to be women with penises. And they're surely not demanding that we be in fear of them. Women don't understand why we're afraid. So what if we were to simply go about the business of tackling this fear of women, meeting it up front with courage, and just taking small steps to see where that goes. The first suggestion I'm going to make, and Avram, you're welcome to add to this before we close, is guys, just start talking to women whether you're attracted to them or not. And I've said this before, but assume women want to be friendly. They're not trying to shoot you down. They're not looking for reasons to reject you. A lot of men's dating advice talks about women testing men. It's not an attempt by a woman to disqualify you. Again, as I've said on this show before, often I've said it on this show before, women are giving you an opportunity. Women are handing you an opportunity on a silver platter to man up and attract them. That's what they're doing. They want you to be manly. They want you to step up with courage, talk to them. And Avram, I'd love to know what you'd have to say about this. So many of us in this culture are suffering such a deep-seated fear of women on so many levels. I dare say you would virtually have zero competition in this arena if you just stuck your toe in the swimming pool once and for all.
Well, I think if you do find a way to stick your toe in that pool, you're going to find it to be very effective. The analogy that I use with people to understand this is one that everyone understands, which is sex. And sex is the perfect analogy because sex works best when each person is as interested in the other person's pleasure as they are in their own. It does not work well if either person is primarily interested in their own pleasure, but not their partner's pleasure. But equally, it doesn't work well if either person is more interested in their other person's pleasure than their own. And so on a date, the reason men get anxious is because they're only paying attention to half the equation. Does she like me? When in fact, the best gauge of how it's going is how you're feeling, not what you're imagining she's judging. And if you stick with how it's going for you, that's the most accurate information you can get about how it's going between the two of you.
Boom. Mic drop. Guys, I am so glad I invited Dr. Avram Weiss onto this show today because this has been a classic episode for the ages. Fantastic stuff. Guys, you need to drop everything as soon as you're done listening to this episode and head directly to mountaintoppodcast.com/Avram, which is AVRUM. Okay. It's like audio visual Bacardis. Avram.
I never heard that one.
Well, now you have.
Okay.
AVRUM. So you want to go to mountaintoppodcast.com/AVRUM, Avram. It actually will teleport you telemagically to AvramWeissPhD.com. There you'll find out all about Avram, what he's got going on. He'll even give you a free ebook when you sign up for his newsletter, which you absolutely should. And also when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon, you'll be able to check out my Amazon storefront. And I've put both of Avram's books at the top of the queue if you're listening to this show very shortly after it is dropped. And right there, not hidden in plain sight, but in plain sight, is Avram's book, Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. And right next to it will be Living and Loving Mutually, How to Break Free of Hurtful Relationship Patterns. What a great show. Avram, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Today.
I want to add one more quick thing to your wonderful promos there. I really pride myself. I have never received an email from a listener or a reader that I haven't answered. And I take a lot of pride in that. So I want people to know, if you have questions about what you're reading or what we've talked about today, if you email me, I will reply. Just go to AvramWeissPhD.com and you can email me from there.
So in other words, guys can email you right from the website.
Yes.
Fantastic. I love guys who aren't ivory tower guys. That's just so douchey to be like that. Yeah. And what's really funny is most people who are in the psychology field understand that instinctively, and they're not.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Isn't that something? It's all the marketing douchebags who are the ivory tower types. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff. So once again, go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Avram, AVRUM. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, man, there are just Lots of things to do there nowadays. You can download free books, including Sticking Point Solved, Dealing with Breakups, and my very first book, Deserve What You Want, which is $37 all day long in the X and Y Communications store, but it's there for you for free when you sign up for my newsletter, which is fluff free and gives you daily actionable ways to be better with women. Some of you guys have still not talked to me for 25 minutes. That's available to you right from the website. You can get on my calendar and schedule that time with me. As I mentioned, we have also just released the Unsettled program. Guys, if you feel like you're getting a little stuck in your ways and life isn't really necessarily painful, but it's not really exciting either, and you're starting to get the realization, you could die here happily, what's going to get you off of top dead center and get you out into action so you don't feel washed up, you don't feel like life's passing you by, but you feel like you're actively taking a bite out of this thing? Hey, you can get started today. Today literally can be the first day of the rest of your life in the best way possible. And the Suburban Sleepwalk. Check out mountaintoppodcast.com/unsettled. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scot McKay from X and Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X and Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X and Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.